In this screencast, we're going to take a look at fixed fields in the XamDataGrid. So the first thing we're going to do is add a XamDataGrid to our application here. And I'm going to go ahead and drag that onto my form. The next thing I'm going to do is just change the height and width here to auto. So we'll change our height. We'll also remove the margin, which we don't really need here. And we'll go ahead and change the width as well, so we're at auto. Alright, now our grid is going to conform to the size of our main application window itself. Now let's go ahead and talk about some data. So I'm just going to use a simple link to SQL data source here. I'll left click on my project node. I'll go ahead and select add, new item, and we'll select link to SQL classes underneath our data. So it's going to go ahead and generate that for us. Now we'll go into our Server Explorer, and I'm just going to choose a database. You'll notice I'm using the Northwind database here. You probably are familiar with these tables. So I'm going to grab the orders table and drag that onto my designer window here. It'll go ahead and generate that class for me. I'll go ahead and save that. Now I'm going to go over to my XAML window again, and we can go ahead and hook up this data. So actually, let's go into our code view, and what we're going to do is instantiate our data classes data context. So we'll do data classes data context equals new data classes data context. And then I'm just going to assign the context.orders, which is the orders collection, to our data source property of the XamDataGrid. So we'll do XamDataGrid data source equals context.orders. Alright, now we can go ahead and build this just to make sure that our grid is showing up and that we're filling it up with data. So we'll take a look at what this looks like by default. And you notice we have our grid showing up. Our data is all populated inside of here. I can go ahead and scroll through all of my columns. But again, the usability here is probably a little bit in question. If you're building this for a line of business application, the user probably really cares about what this order ID is. And as they scroll across, they lose that bit of information. So let's go ahead and fix that field in place for them. So we'll close this window down, and let's go into our properties again. Alright, and what we're going to do here is go into the properties for the XamDataGrid and start setting some of the fixed field properties. So the first thing we'll want to do is enable fixing, and we'll do that by setting allow fixing equal to yes. Actually, we're going to set it to whether we want it to happen on the left, the right, or both. And then we're going to go ahead and customize how the fixing is occurring on different fields. So the first place we'll want to look is inside of the field settings. So we'll go to our field settings here inside of the grid, and we'll set this allow fixing. You'll notice it's already at default, which is no. Let's go ahead and set this to near or far. Now by setting it to near or far, you'll allow it to fix fields to the left or the right side of the grid. So now if we go ahead and view this same application, we'll just do a quick build and browse here, you'll see that we'll actually get the pin inside of each one of these columns. So we can go ahead and pin a column to the left-hand side or the right-hand side. And when I click on one of these, I get this menu that shows up, which allows me to choose whether I want it to be on the left-hand side or the right-hand side. So we'll go ahead and say fix this to the near edge. And now as I scroll through, that column is already pinned. So in many cases, you would probably have a requirement for having a column fixed by default, rather than having the user to have to do that themselves. So let's go ahead and make that happen in this application. So what we're going to want to do is go into our field layout and go into the specific field, and we'll create one for order ID. So we're going to go into our field layout here, and let's just scroll up. We'll create a new field layout, and then inside of this we'll go into the fields, add a new field, and we'll make the name of this order ID so it's matched up to our order ID field. Now what we can do here is say fixed location and set what we want that to be. So let's say it's fixed to the near edge. We'll click on OK. And now when we go ahead and view this again, you'll notice that the order ID column starts out pinned to the left-hand side, and as I scroll through, that record remains there. Now, perhaps you wanted to change this so that the user doesn't see that pin indicator. Maybe you just want to give them this functionality of seeing the field pinned to the left-hand side, but you don't want them to be able to pin it themselves. You have a couple of ways of going about that. The first way we'll look at is setting it on the individual field itself. So if we go back into our field layouts and go back into our fields, we'll go into the field that we created for order ID. And what we can do here is go ahead and change the settings. So we'll go into our field settings and we'll change allow fixing equal to no. And now we'll click on OK here. Viewing the same application, we'll build it again, and you'll notice we no longer have the pin indicator showing up in this column, but it is indeed pinned. So as I scroll through my data, that field will remain fixed to the left-hand side, but the user doesn't see that UI. Perhaps you wanted to change that entirely. Also, you'll notice that there's this scroll bar here, and this is used for fixing multiple columns. This is a nice UI for users that want to be able to fix multiple columns at a time. They could just move this over, and you'll notice now my data, I have 3 columns pinned to the left-hand side, and I can go ahead and scroll through my records. I can go ahead and unpin these using the header icon, or again I can use this scroll bar. So we'll go ahead and close down this application, and let's affect the settings for the entire grid. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is go into our fixed field layout settings, and we'll do that by going back into our properties here. So we're going to go into our field layout settings, and we'll scroll down, and you'll see we have our fixed field UI type. Now we can change this. By default, it's showing both the button and the splitter. We can have it just show the button, which is that indicator that shows up inside of the header, or just the splitter, or we can turn it off completely. So let's turn it off completely. And we'll go ahead and build and browse this one more time. And you'll notice now I no longer have a UI showing me that I can fix a field, but I can indeed still show fixed fields. So my order ID field is still fixed. And if you wanted to have other fields fixed as well, you could do that. This works well if you wanted to give the user a separate UI to go ahead and fix fields. Maybe it was based on a configuration that they're setting inside of an options dialog. You can go ahead and use that, and then turn off the UI type that's being used for fixed fields inside of that field layout settings. Alright, so that was a really quick look at using fixed fields inside of the XamDataGrid.
Infragistics. On the web at infragistics.com.